Good morning, everyone. My name is Jordan Orange. I'm the chair of pediatrics at Columbia, and I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It means so much that so many of you would stop what you're doing to join us for this important dialogue. This is part of a series where we're really trying to come up with some topics that represent some expertise amongst our faculty to really engage with all of you as the community to try and advance the well-being of our children. We really are working hard as Columbia to be present in this community, to be accessible for those of you that are clinicians in the community. Hopefully you've seen some of what we're trying to do in White Plains and North Broadway, Tarrytown. But we're really trying to increase our efforts to be present, to be meaningful, to be accessible, but also to be partners in advancing the well-being of the children of your community and the children that you care for and the children of your families. And there couldn't really be more of an important topic than the one that we're taking on today, and I'm really excited about it. And I've been really humbled to come to know the faculty that we have assembled here today, a really extraordinary group of experts and leaders in this field of the well-being of our children, the topics of resiliency, which we hear so much about. But I'll just, because I'm really so proud of all of them, just mention them by name, but then turn over to our host and moderator. But we have, and again, just kind of starting from furthest away from me, Dani Dumitriu, who's an assistant professor, a pediatrician, and a neurobiologist who really focuses on kind of the studies and networking of resiliency. Karen Soren, who's a professor and leader in adolescent medicine and really has put a lot of her focus on the developing brain and really what that means to the practice of adolescent medicine and the care of adolescents. Marina Catallozzi, who is an associate professor at Columbia and adolescent medicine specialist. She's also the vice chair for education in the Department of Pediatrics at Columbia, and really has focused her clinical career on the well-being of adolescents, but on learning in general, and is an expert nationally in that area. And then Jonathan Slater in the Department of Psychiatry, who really is a leader in child psychiatry and in many of the vulnerabilities that children face. And again, it's been just such a humbling experience for me to come to know these talented individuals, and so delighted for them to be able to share in their knowledge with you and learn from you and be part of this community. And of course, really, nothing short of delighted that Dr. Max has really kind of joined us in these series, and moderator par excellence, but his insight as a physician and a scholar has really been wonderful in this past series. And again, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you in the future, but also to being part of your community. So please join me in welcoming our panel and Dr. Max.
Thank you, Jordan. And I'm a little bit upset because I've been practicing pronouncing these names all morning long, and it looks like you went ahead and pronounced them for me. So that's actually good. That'll make life a little easier. This is a really interesting topic. When we started talking about doing this, I got really excited because we cover this on television a lot, obviously, and we hear a lot of the, I guess, the effects of bullying from time to time, some of the terrible effects of bullying from time to time. But we've always found that it's kind of hard to get our arms around it, how to define it, what is it, who's at risk, and most importantly, what do you do about it? I was trying to think back to, I guess, my elementary school, junior high school, and high school days, and I think, I was trying to remember, I think I can remember at least one event where I was probably bullied, and I suspect that I inadvertently probably bullied somebody else somewhere down the line, which is part of it. You don't really realize sometimes what you're doing and what you're saying, especially back at least when I was growing up, the weird kids were just the weird kids, and it was kind of okay to pick on them. It's not okay anymore, and that's what we're going to get into today, I hope. So we want to talk a little bit about the definition of bullying, the frequency, the overlap really between sort of physical, emotional, and behavioral bullying. And this is what we have some really terrific experts here to talk about. And since we've kind of already been introduced, right? Why don't we start? Let's see, how about on the far end over there? Dani, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your area, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. And we'll have time, about 40, 45 minutes, hopefully, to take some questions from all of you at the end. Dan?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. I am a general pediatrician. I spend 20% of my time as a physician in the well-being nursery. But most of my time I actually spend doing very basic neuroscience. I work on mice, I work on brains, I look inside them, I cut them up, I study the very building blocks of neurons and circuits. But my interest is really in understanding how the brains of more resilient individuals are connected differently from the brains of those that are more susceptible. And so most of the time in the lab, I work on a mouse model where we basically try to replicate the core features of bullying. And so what we do, and I know that this sounds, I'm very aware that this is, can be an uncomfortable topic, but we basically put a small mouse into the cage of a bigger aggressive mouse, and we allow them to have a physical altercation. For some experiments, we actually do this repeatedly with various bullying mice for 10 days in a row. And most importantly, in order to replicate some of the features that we know from the human case of bullying, we also include a psychosocial component by allowing the two mice to live in the same cage, but separated with a divider. So they can still see each other, smell each other, kind of talk to each other, and bully each other through these little holes, but they can't physically have an altercation. But why do we do this? So what I'm really interested in is not the fact that on average, if you look at all these mice that have been bullied, they have very similar features to what human depression or any kind of consequence of bullying will show, which is, for example, now wanting to hang out with friends, losing interest in things that you normally find pleasurable, changes in sleep, changes in eating, very similar features to what humans have. But what fascinates me is that a subset of these animals don't show these features. So about 40% of our mice actually go on to act as if nothing, well, not quite as if nothing happened, but don't show these very core features. And the most interesting component of this is that all of these mice have on average the same, have lived in the same cages, sometimes they're actually siblings, have eaten the same chow. There's no differences in their experience up until that point. And yet there's something in their brains that experience this bullying event differently. And so why is this important? Well, it means that perhaps, A, we can focus on those individuals that will be more susceptible to bullying and really put more of our efforts into those cases. But more importantly, what I'm really hoping to do is basically be able to understand how we can subtly shift the development towards the more resilient phenotype. Again, because these mice are on average living very similar lives, that means that there are some small inflection points during their development that make that huge difference. So that's what I'm really interested in, and I'm hoping to build sort of the groundwork of prevention at this very basic level.
Very interesting now. Tell the truth, how many of you out there really thought that you could have mice that bullied each other out there? I was thinking more along Biff and Marty McFly kind of thing. Well, you remember Back to the Future, that's good. Sometimes you make these references and you never know. My bad, I got a little bit out of order there. Karen, if you would start us out with, give us a little bit more about sort of the definition and so forth about bullying. What are we really talking about?
All right. So first of all, I'm Karen Soren. I've been at Columbia for about 30 years. I see patients in the outpatient setting primarily, but also we consult on inpatients. I have a large community clinic that we see teenagers, and then I also have a faculty practice where I actually see young adults as well, because I've found that the spectrum, we see kids from now in my faculty practice between 11 and 27. There's not a whole lot of difference sometimes with young adults in their 20s. I think the needs and the issues, even with respect to bullying, are very similar. So I'll start with that. The definition of bullying, I think everyone knows that, but we sort of use it, we use a CDC definition, which basically says that it's any unwanted aggressive behavior or behaviors perpetrated by a youth or a group of youth, so not adults, and they can't be siblings or dating partners because those are different definitions, involving observed or perceived power imbalance. That's really the critical piece of it. And it has to be repeated or more likely to be repeated over time. It's generally not a single incident. But bullying is a spectrum, we all know that. And sometimes the same thing that one child will, the same kind of verbal insults that someone will receive will be perceived very differently by another child. So a lot of it depends on the temperament and the ability and the resilience of the person upon who that act is being perpetrated. So that's one thing. We have several different categories of bullying. In the old days, it was like stuffing your kid in the locker kind of thing, or putting him in the garbage can. And my son was put in a locker once, got to tell you. That's direct physical bullying. Direct verbal is just, as you would know, insults to someone's face. What we're seeing now, which I think are more problematic and more pervasive, are the indirect relational type of bullying. And that's social exclusion, rumor spreading, and that's, I think, very toxic. We see that a lot more with girls. And cyberbullying, of course, is now relatively new. Although I have to tell you that when you look at the data, the prevalence of cyberbullying has been pretty much the same for the last 6 years. So it's been out there. It just might have changed forms a little bit, but electronic bullying has been there for a while. If I give you prevalence real quickly, we get data from the YRBS, Youth Risk Behavioral Survey by the CDC. And the 2017 data was the last data that's out there, shows that basically 19% of kids have been bullied at school and 15% have been cyberbullied. New York State is very similar. That's US overall. New York State, actually 21% of kids have been cyberbullied. So 1 in 5 kids in New York have been cyberbullied. I think that's important. Who's at risk? You probably know this, anyone who's different. And we are particularly racial, ethnic, gender, sexual minorities. We know that LGBT kids are, 1/3 of them have reported being bullied in one form or another versus 20% of general heterosexual youth. Kids who look different, kids who are smarter than everyone else, kids who are more academically challenged. Anyone who's a little bit different can be bullied, and those are at risk. I want to just really quickly, and Marina will do a little bit more on this, on developmental issues. I always thought of 8th grade as the year from hell. We divide adolescence into 3 developmental stages, early, middle, and late. And the early kids are like 12 to 14. That time, when kids are a little more concrete, when they can't really see the future that well, those kids who are bullied, it can be everything for them. There cannot be a way out for those kids. So again, 8th grade, the year from hell, when we see a lot of risky behaviors, that's when we see a lot of eating disorders starting, a lot of self-injury occurring, and bullying around that time is particularly pernicious and pervasive. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there, and you can ask me more questions.
All right. Marina, I want to come back to you in a second here, but let me get to John, because it plays off of this a little bit. Because Karen mentioned some of the factors that, I guess, put you at risk for being bullied. What are some of the behaviors or risk factors here that we're talking about?
Sure. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I've been at Columbia also a long time. And I want to say, in addition to talking about risk factors for adverse outcomes from bullying, you have to talk about protective factors. So I'm really happy to have been invited to be here by Dr. Weiner and to be with my colleagues who I've also known for a long, long time. And I feel like there's a sense of connectedness that's helped me traversed some of the challenging events at Columbia for the past 25 or 30 years as well. So I think it's important to talk about protective factors as well as risk factors. But, and in my practice, which is part-time at Columbia now, working a lot with medically ill kids, but also in private practice, the issues really are the associations between being bullied and other adverse health outcomes. And it's not simply about identifying perpetrators, but actually the bully victims, the ones who bully and who are also victimized, are actually at the highest risk for, say, suicide, for example. So, and a lot of what goes on in my practice is questions come up about, well, what's going to happen to my kid? You know, why is my kid getting bullied? Or what should I do, you know, at this point because my kid is being bullied? And there's just a large association of health risk factors that are associated with bullying, which is just one of many, many adverse life experiences that can lead to further problems. And there are many, many associations between bullying and other predisposing factors, which, you know, were alluded to earlier. Why are some people more susceptible? Well, they have histories of anxiety or depression. They have histories of violence or violence exposure. They have histories of being different, LGBT kids who have learning disabilities. They have histories of being sexually or physically abused themselves. So there's vulnerabilities that come up that make people more susceptible to not only being bullied, but also to how they react to being bullied. And there's been a number of studies looking at both predisposing factors that lead to child depression when they're bullied early on. That's been looked at in 3rd to 5th graders, showing that even a year later, they're much more likely to be depressed. That's thought to arise from interference with how they learn to cope with being bullied and with stressful experiences. And there's data to suggest that they later have problems with emotional regulation and with impulsive behavior. And then there's multiple associations with the experience of being bullied with lots of different other problems with violence, problems with sexual behavior, problems with school performance, problems with anxiety, depression, conflict within the family. So bullying is one of a series of problems that are all interrelated. And then, of course, one of the major concerns for me, and I'm sure for a lot of you, are the associations between bullying and increased risk of suicide attempts, which I can talk about, you know, more later. But there's been a lot of recent data looking at probably a 2- to 3-fold increase in risk of suicide attempts in children who have been bullied, which isn't a direct causal relationship. So it's important to try to get away from some of the media hype and sensationalism surrounding bullying and suicide, because it's unclear at this point how that complex interrelationship works. But what is clear, whether you look at Western countries, there's a study looking at the United States, I think Ireland, Sweden, and New Zealand, showing close to a 3-factor increase in suicide attempts in kids who've been bullied. It's been looked at in Europe for kids specifically who were relationally bullied, cyberbullying, showing like something like 1.7 increased risks purely from that. And then it's been looked at more recently, a paper actually last month in the Child Psychiatry Journal in developing countries, study of 48 countries, all that were developing countries, and the increased risk of suicide attempts if you were bullied was factor of 3. And that was only if you were bullied 1 out of the prior 30 days, and there was a dose effect. So if you were bullied more than once out of the prior 30 days, there was even a heightened risk of suicide attempts. So all this needs to be taken into account as a fairly complex public health problem. And I'll touch later, I guess, on intervention strategies, because traditionally intervention strategies have looked at just preventing bullies or identifying bullies or punishing bullies. And that really has shown not to be very effective in reducing the incidence of bullying, only maybe 17 to 20% reduction in people being victimized from simply doing that. So it needs to be thought of on a much larger scale, and also kids need to be screened more effectively in pediatric practices, mental health practices, and coaches, administrators, teachers, pastors, you know, they need to be much better at recognizing bullying and at being able to provide real-time solutions and recommendations for kids about what to do when they're bullied. And so it's really it's a much larger problem than simply looking at targeting the bully or preventing the bullying. The studies looking at general violence reduction are probably more effective than specifically actually targeting bullying for example, and also looking at high at risk individual groups who are more susceptible to be bullying. So, and we can talk more about that later on in the questions
We've
section.
got plenty of time and we'll get back to it. But so what you're saying, if I hear it correctly, it's not just emotional effects, there could actually be some real physical health effects if you're bullied.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, kids that are bullied, first of all, when they grow up to be adults, they're more likely to smoke, be overweight, have increased medical problems, and also kids who are bullied are more likely also to be victims or perpetrators of violence, be involved in sexual relationships and encounters in which they're victimized, have worse asthma, more sleep problems, higher rates of obesity, higher rates of physical inactivity. So there's lots of associations between being bullied and physical health.
Somehow I knew the media was going to get some blame somewhere along the line in here, but that's okay. We take a lot of heat all the time. Marina, I hear a lot of talk about resilience here, and I see you nodding your head a little bit about that. Tell us about your area and tell us a little bit about resilience.
Yeah, I guess what I would start with is all of us taking a step back and saying, when you look at your patient panel and you see a 15-year-old, what does that evoke for you, right? I love babies, but I went into adolescent medicine because it's tough, right? It's a vulnerable population, it takes more time, and in many ways they've been framed, I won't say the media, in general, they're framed as storm and stress, it's an awful time of life, and they're so at risk. What I try to practice is called a strengths-based approach, which is basically saying, you know, everybody has strengths, right? Even the kid who's smoking marijuana every day, 3 times a day, likely has found a way to manage stress, right? Now, does that condone the behavior? No, but it's saying, look, you found a way to manage stress. What are other strengths that you have, and what can you use to do that, right? So that's the whole model. And what I try to think about every day is, you know, thinking about the 3 things that kill kids 15 to 24, right? It's suicide, homicide, and motor vehicle accidents, right? So those things are what kind of get me up in the morning, right? Thinking like, how are we going to protect kids? And the way to do that is to find these strength-based approaches. Resiliency theories, basically, no one is born with the character trait, right? You can likely be, you probably have some, you know, neuromodulation. I was a neuroscience undergrad, but now I'm going to embarrass myself. You probably have some, there are people who are, those connections are already there for them for whatever reason. Is it their neurobiology? Is it how they were raised? And what we want to get across to parents and to any adult is that the resiliency theory holds that people either live up to or down to your expectations, right? So we have to help parents, help pastors, and even ourselves to build those models of resilience. So what do I mean by that? There is a guy named Ken Ginsberg who I trained with who talks about the 7 C's of resiliency. And they are very basic, but we can think about them even in practice. So I've done some national work looking at adolescents, and they're speaking privately with physicians, right? Over 50% by age 17 have not spoken privately with a physician. And we all know it's busy, you know the parents well, they seem like a good family, you don't want to get them out of the room. But if we're not talking to them alone, we're basically telling them, I don't really need to listen to what you have to say, and then they don't have the capacity to talk with us, right? So the 7 C's of resilience are thinking about competence. So how are we helping families to build kids' confidence? And it doesn't have to just be educational skills, but even things like stress relief. How are young people learning how to manage stress? And as we look at what's happening in the community of physicians and burnout and how to manage stress relief, right? Even people who are really high functioning sometimes don't have that capacity. So that's one thing, competence. Confidence, how do you build confidence? How do you not just do things for young people? How do you get them to build their own confidence? Connection. So if we are all on the elevator looking at our phones, we're not making eye contact, we don't connect. Sure, you can connect on Snapchat and Instagram, but that's a really different connection. How do you get young people to connect? Character and contribution, I often put those together. I've worked with a lot of young people, and young people who have nothing, right? So they're coming from really difficult neighborhoods. They always want to give back. I remember, doing a fundraiser for a local bookstore, right? That idea of contribution really can help to build character and resilience. Coping, again, that relates again to how you deal with disappointment, how you can redirect yourself, teaching people that your failures actually can be an example to others when you redirect and can succeed. And the final is control, and that's the piece that I think is so hard for parents, and I think that can be modeled in our practices, right? If you give the young person time where they're talking with you on their own, that gives them a sense of control, and that's exactly what's not happening in a bullying situation, right? And how do you get them back to having that sense of control? So I just mentioned those 7 C's because I think some of it is really just a framework. A strengths-based approach is really taking a step back and saying, how can I look at this? You know, we'll be talking to a kid who, I mean, they're failing, they're not going to school, they're smoking every day, you know, all of this stuff, and just being able to say, it's so great that you're talking to me. It can be so hard for a 14-year-old to talk to an adult. Even just finding that strength and figuring out where can we go from there, what thread can we follow. So I think so that may not be an answer about like, well, what is resilience, but sort of starting in ourselves to try to help families reframe their view of their children. And I think for me, the most difficult thing is when you have a family that comes in that just has thrown their hands up and said, I don't know what to do with them anymore, and getting them to reframe and see their child in a different way.
So, Marina, I want to get you and Dani together to talk a little bit about resilience here in 1 second, but I don't want to get too far off there just yet. But I mean, what I think Karen and John were saying is that the person who's at risk for getting bullied is often someone who's different. A lot of times you can't do very much about being different, right? So what I'm hearing though from you is one potential, not necessarily solution, is to give the child a sense of self-worth by contributing, doing something.
Yes, exactly. And I think also that celebrating their difference, right? So if you look at, we were talking before about early adolescence, really, and middle adolescence, the peer group is such a powerful thing. So that if you have a young person who dresses differently than everyone else and is trying to assert themselves, right, that you can celebrate that, right? Sort of saying, like, tell me a little bit about your choices. Or if they are doodling in a notebook and they say, like, oh, nobody likes that I draw so much, saying, like, well, are you with other young people who draw? Just sort of focusing in on some of that, and also they maybe teach other people to draw, sort of, again, finding something for them in the community where maybe they are taken out of the situation at school where they're bullying. Maybe there's a community center where they can teach young people to draw, right? So it's sort of giving them the opportunity to see that your difference may be not seen as a positive in your school environment, but if we put you somewhere else, if you go to a camp and you're a counselor there and that's something that you can teach, that would be a positive, right? So helping families to find those things instead of saying you have to stay on track like everybody else because they're not going to be celebrated in those situations.
So let me throw some questions out in general here to the panel, and not necessarily to any one person here. You can feel free to jump in. We talked about the person who's most at risk, I guess, for being bullied is someone who's a little different. But we also often hear that, for example, the school didn't recognize that a child was being bullied. How do we recognize that? Is there some way to be able to figure that out?
I can go a little bit into warning sign. For parents, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some very nice brochures for parents out there, and pediatricians can pull them about how to recognize if your child is being bullied. Now, particularly cyberbullying is very tricky because it's very unseen by parents, right? Often if there's physical bullying, your kid's going to come back with a bruise or something, or the school's going to call and say your kid was in a fight. The quietness of cyberbullying, the unseen nature of it, makes it much harder for families actually to even understand. So what are some things you can look for as parents, or you can talk to your parents if you're a provider, is kids who withdraw, kids who are on their phone all the time or on their computer all the time, but are upset, okay? A lot of kids are laughing when they're on or they're watching something, but kids who look and then get very upset, who pull back, who withdraw, who socially withdraw. Now, clearly kids who are doing poorly academically, you want to ask about bullying. Kids who are withdrawing from their friend group or suddenly don't want to go out anymore or seem afraid. Kids who are afraid to go to school, a very, very critical thing to look for. And in fact, we know that there are certain risk factors for weapon carrying. Kids who are bullied are twice as likely to carry a weapon than kids who are not bullied. That's interesting, right? And in this age of Columbine, you have to worry, clearly. Kids who are missing school, who've been threatened at school, who are afraid to go to school, 46% of them have been known to carry a weapon at some point. Again, something to think about. I'm sorry. So these are kids that are at risk. That's the things you work with.
John, would it make any sense to try to restrict screen time for kids? Good luck.
Probably
Yeah,
every
good luck with
parent
that, right?
asks me that. I think it's really difficult to restrict screen time for kids, but there are a lot of ways parents can try to do that with internet controls. There's a website called Common Sense Media, some of you may or may not know, which gives a lot of tips about how to restrict screen time with kids. And so I think it is something that parents can do. There's also been some suggestions that, and this gets into privacy issues, that some of the conversation occurring amongst kids there could be ways to use artificial intelligence actually to kind of screen what's being passed between kids and identify when things are being said or threats are being made online. So it's a very complicated issue, but it was in a paper that I recently had a review.
There's an app for that? I mean, there's an app for
Well,
that?
yeah, so, yeah, I mean, and as you probably know, I mean, Facebook is doing that now to try to identify fake accounts and various kinds of trolling that's going on the internet. So there's more technology going into trying to identify that. But parents themselves, it's a little bit like, the war against drugs. They do that and then we do this. Kids try to find ways around something, but I think that there are ways that parents can try to do that.
So, Dan, yes, please,
I
go ahead.
can't stress enough that a parent has to advocate for their child, and that is, if a parent knows that bullying is happening and doesn't do anything, essentially they've showed their child that, like, I kind of don't believe you, or I have no power and therefore you have no power. And there are things they can do. They can go to the school. We assume that a school is going to handle it well, but as you all know, that's not always the case. So if a school thinks it's a good idea to have a mediated conversation between the bullied and the bullier, that's a bad idea. And I've gone to Dr. Slater for advice of what do you have to do? What do you say to a school? What does a parent need to say so that the school understands? I mean, there are laws that kind of protect kids and protect families. So I think that's actually important, and I think something that we have to instill in our families is that they have to advocate for their kids.
So the tough love drill sergeant, just suck it up and deal with it is not the right approach.
No, I don't think so.
And
Dan, yeah? Oh,
I would love to add a little bit of the basic science behind that. So the emotional connection between parent and child is incredibly important. There's a lot of basic science, not just in humans, but also in other animals, that the more connected the mom and the infant, or the rat mom and the rat infant are, the better the social relationships later on, the less susceptibility later on. So in our model, for example, of the bullying, it's known that if you maternally separate those individuals, so the mice that we bully in adulthood, if we have done a manipulation early in life in which we remove them from the mom repeatedly over the first couple of weeks of life, that actually increases susceptibility later on. So there's a very fundamental basic science connecting the parents to the children.
So Dani, if I'm hearing you right though, you're born with some resilience, or you have an inner strength that you might be born with, or is this, Marina, something that you can be taught or you can learn? There's that argument about, is it something you're born with, or is it something that you can learn? What are you learning from your basic science?
So for sure, like everything else in life, it's both. Absolutely. There are absolute genes that are involved in increased susceptibility. In our model in particular, one of the unique things about it is that all the mice are actually twins of each other. So they're all genetically homogeneous. And that's the fascinating aspect, right? That they're starting...
including the bullying mice?
No, not the bullying mice.
Okay.
The bullying mice, and there's a whole other literature on the aggression and the bullying, and really fascinating work on that, which I don't myself work, but I do follow. but in our bullied mice, they're all starting from the same basic clean slate, and they're genetically identical. Now, interestingly, there are some features that were really interesting in what you were saying in terms of sociability and withdrawal, and both Marina and Karen mentioned that we've replicated in mice as well. So for example, if you socially isolate mice before you do this bullying experiment, they will have increased susceptibility. Additionally, if you watch within their community, so we keep 4 mice in a cage, if you watch within the community of that cage, the most vulnerable mouse is the one who actually gets like micro-bullied within the cage by the other ones. Those mice are almost always going to be susceptible to this manipulation, whereas the dominant mice have a much higher probability of being resilient. And that's not a dominance in that they're really bullying each other necessarily in the cage, but it's these very subtle micro anger or playful behavior that is happening on a day-to-day basis. And if you're constantly subjected to losing, if you're losing on a daily basis to your peers, that actually can make you more susceptible to a bigger event of bullying.
And so, excuse me, got a little fog in my throat there. And so you've got the bullying mice and the mice that are being bullied, and the genetics end up determining a certain amount of, or a certain wiring in the brain. Is that a fair way to put it?
It's a very complicated question that we still have actually very little knowledge about. What we do know is that the connections between neurons, it starts out prenatally, so it starts out in utero, but experience tremendous changes during development all the way into early adulthood, actually.
So I trained as a neuroscientist, so I wandered off the reservation a little bit there. Is it fair to say then genetics are destiny?
No.
Here.
No, absolutely not.
You don't have to turn out to be a bullied mouse or an individual. Marina, is that can you teach resilience here?
I think you can teach resilience at any age. I'm an optimist by nature, but I also think that you can see it with I mean, it's really what we are trying to model, right, with family. Otherwise, why would we try any of the interventions that we do? So I have an example of, I feel like one of the things people have referred to often is like anger management. We've all heard that. That's basically like teaching someone to be resilient and not to fight, right? I remember in fellowship I had a patient who just kept on getting into fights, and she was so upset. And I said, what do you do when you're angry? And she was sitting there, just, I don't know, what do you do when you're angry, Dr. Catallozzi? And I said, well, sometimes I'll take a walk, I'll call a friend, and I gave her 5 things that I do. And she just looked at me, and it was clear that she had no idea that those were options, what to do with her emotions. And I went out to get her mother from the waiting area, and her mother was having a fight with our intake person. They were screaming at each other, and I thought, oh wow, okay, so this is what she's seen, right? So some of it is learned behavior, and I brought them in, and they did beautifully with therapy. They did beautifully even with little things like, here's a notebook, write down your feelings, little things. And sometimes it's really just, I mean, I think this sounds silly, and this is a very obvious obvious thing, but we were talking in the car about sometimes I actually do talk about apps with my patients. There's an app called Calm. Part of it is free. If they're having trouble and they need to calm down, they can play music or listen to a story, or sometimes Headspace if it's someone who's a little bit older and wants to try to meditate. Again, sometimes it's just giving people capacities. Now that's not maybe going to help them in the moment that they're being bullied to say now I'm going to count backwards from 10, but maybe it will make them calmer and make them understand that I'm not going to put myself in this situation because I know when I'm in that situation before, someone's not very nice to me. I'm going to go sit near people who are going to be nicer to me, right? So it's all about getting people to protect themselves, to build strengths, to see that they're worth it, right? And you do that when you feel like you can be in control of your emotions and manage your day.
John, did you got something to add there?
Yeah, I mean, there are also, just borrowing what Marina's saying, specific therapies which are, manualized therapies that are really geared toward helping people cope with adverse experiences. Dialectical behavior therapy is the one that immediately comes to mind, which really is focused on relational conflict and how to self-advocate and how to regulate your mood when you become upset, when you become angry, when you feel threatened, et cetera, and to be able to generate strategies to respond to that and to help yourself not go to desperate places, essentially. So, and those things also can really be a very, moderating factor in how someone responds emotionally to being bullied or being feeling helpless, really.
So, but what I'm hearing here also is, and maybe the question is, at what point do you seek professional help? Do you say, I can't do this with my child anymore? When do I go to professional help?
Well, I mean, I think when there's a lot of distress, I mean, some of it's subjective, right? A kid who's in a lot of distress, and then warning signs, kids who are isolated, kids who are school performance is going down, kids who are oversleeping and don't want to go to school, kids who seem alienated from their peers.
And they're not responding to whatever the parents do.
Right, not responding, kids who, look depressed, who are having more outbursts, so it's usually some assessment by a parent of the level of distress their kid is in, or told that their kid is in by other people who may notice, which happens a lot, or impairment in how they're functioning, really. So in terms of school, their sports, their social lives and such. So, so I think there's, and I think also there's, in terms of identifying kids, there's certainly active screening. I think everyone should be asking questions in all professions that deal with children, whether it's guidance counselors or pediatricians or psychiatrists. Part of the questions, whether you're asking about home education activities, what acronym you follow, right? Are you being bullied, and are you being the victim, perpetrator of violence? It goes part of the general assessment that you should do. And then I think that teachers and other administrators can be trained to identify bullying, because kids who are bullied often don't obviously come forward with the fact they're bullying, but people watching carefully can often pick up on kids that are being bullied.
But if you don't ask, you're not often
If you
not
don't
going to
ask,
find out.
right, but if you ask, they'll usually will tell you. It's the same thing, kids who are having suicidal thoughts often won't offer them, but amazingly enough, when you ask them, they tell you. So I think asking directly is really, really important.
Interesting. Marina?
I think also that making it part of, as pediatricians, making it part of our anticipatory guidance. So just like we talk about sunscreen, it's really thinking about how you give young people tools, right? What's their toolkit? Like, what's their toolkit to manage things? Kids are disappointed on a daily basis with things, right? And I'm sure you've all read different books, The Blessing of a Skin Me, whatever it is, like sort of those tools, but also sort of elevating, it's screening, but also if you're in your community, making sure that your school has like a clear bullying policy, that maybe they have a day where everybody wears the same t-shirt and says like, we all pledge to not bully, and support those things, because the more open it is, the more everyone is, again, we said kids like to contribute, so maybe there'll be that kid who sees the bullying who says, hey, that's not okay, right? That's what we want. We want our kids to be ambassadors, like of the goodness, right? And that actually is a piece of resilience, right? So I think it's screening is critical, but it's also changing the whole conversation to say, we know this happens. We're not a community that's going to accept it. We're not a school that's going to accept it. We're not a classroom that's going to accept it. And sometimes teachers and administrators need some help in figuring out how you actually can put that into effect.
So in a couple minutes, we're going to take some questions for you, so be thinking about that. I think we're going to have a microphone to pass around so we can hear your questions, be thinking about that. The only thing more dangerous than giving a microphone to a group of mental health professionals and pediatricians is to give it to lawyers. So have a question, not just a speech. Go ahead and make a speech. Go ahead and have a question for us as well. Karen, we've talked a lot about kids who are being bullied. Who's the bullier?
Now, that's really interesting. Often,
and are there interventions for the bullier also?
yeah, we can talk about, often kids who are bullied become bulliers. So kids who have perceived slights in their own lives you can either internalize it and become anxious and depressed, which we often see, or you can externalize that distress and become irritable and become aggressive. And as John mentioned, the kids who are bulliers/victims, and they can be both, are the most at risk for suicidality and things like that. So, so who becomes a bully, right? Often kids who are themselves either bullied or stressed or something has gone on. So we see that.
And it doesn't have to be at school, it could be something at home, for example? That,
Yeah.
that they're being beat up at home,
exactly.
and then they come out
Can
and
they
take
be?
it out
Are
at
they
school.
being ridiculed at home? Are they being made to feel worthless? Are they being abused physically or whatever? Sometimes these kids can lash out and externalize those behaviors and become bullies to those who are more weaker. So that's one thing we do see. Honestly, in my practice, I've also seen kids who are just oblivious. They don't know they're bullying, right? Particularly with girls, guys, right? Anyone have daughters here? I have two. And yeah.
Mean girls.
The mean girls, yeah. And it's not, it's purposeful necessarily. It's cliques. It's, again, developmental. How kids are finding their peer group. And exclusion is part of that, unfortunately. You know, you find the girls who you're friends with and the girls who you're not friends with. Is that bullying or is that normal adolescent development? So again, as Marina says, we want to teach our kids to be kind. And that's really critical. Right? Yeah, okay.
Dani, is as the genetically susceptible mice evolve, have you followed them to see how their brains then actually change depending on whether whether they've been bullied a lot or a little bit, you know, the dominant, the alpha mouse, if you will, versus the more submissive mouse? Do their
Yes.
brains actually then look and
Yes.
change,
Absolutely.
become different?
Absolutely, they change dramatically, and they can actually have a very long-lasting syndrome, just like in humans, where they can, in essence, be depressed for even the rest of their lives, and those depression phenotypes can actually be reversed by similar interventions to human interventions. So both psychosocial interventions, so providing them with more interactions with non-aggressive mice, as well as by medical interventions, so similar medications, antidepressants to the human case.
It's interesting, and presumably, and I think this is the case, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, because I did a panel back a little while ago about the effects of poverty and abuse at home and what that does to the neurobiology. So presumably what you're talking about in mice does in fact or can in fact translate to humans.
Absolutely, absolutely. Impoverishing them by having no sort of toys in the cage makes them more susceptible. When you stress a mother, so not necessarily separate the mother and their pups, but when you stress the mother, so for example, we have, there's a model, not in my lab, but there's a model that is used, which is a limiting bedding. So you don't allow enough of the stuff in the cage, and that makes the mom stressed out. It's very similar to a low socioeconomic status in humans, and that actually gets taken out on the pups and will have very long-term consequences for their brain development and for their susceptibility.
And what you're referring to, I think, is ACEs, right? So adverse childhood experiences, which we've all heard
Right.
about, and the one thing that is shown to counteract ACEs is a connection with an adult who cares about you and is supporting you, right? That whole idea of there's an adult who believes in me and is helping me to build some of my capacity and my resilience and skills.
Questions? Raise your hand. Come on, we could not have covered everything that you possibly want to know out there. Go ahead and raise your hand. We won't yell at you or anything else. Bring a mic. Can we get a microphone? Do we have a stick mic up front? While
I
we.
could try to speak loud, if that helps.
Well, yeah, we've got. This is why we've got technology. While we get that to you, hang on one second. Is there a correlation at all with socioeconomic groups and bullying or being bullied?
Well, we do know kids who look different are bullied, right? Kids who dress poorly, who can't, get
afford
new
the
clothes.
latest clothes,
Exactly. Who are wearing sort of like, hand-me-downs, whatever. There can be more bullying for those kids per se. But
That's
other
kind of
than
an
that,
indirect effect.
I'm sorry?
That's kind of an indirect
It's
effect.
indirectly, exactly.
When we think about social determinants of health in general, and we think about, programs that kind of pluck kids out of their environment and put them somewhere else, it's always also thinking about, so if you're, taking a kid from a neighborhood that's, lower socioeconomic status and putting them into private school, for example, do you have the supports in place for that young person? Like, are you really thinking about, the makeup of the rest of the school? It's why things like the posse program exists, right? Like getting kids together who have had similar experiences and making sure that they're getting support, right? So I think that's critically important to think about. So I also think the context you're in, that's what matters. It sort of depends where you are. And so maybe that young person who is kind of, tests into a private school, if they, maybe they're not bullied, but if they're excluded from everything, that's going to make them feel really isolated. So making sure you have supports in place. So all of that is really, like, it can take so many forms, and sometimes we can, make interventions that actually have, consequences that are not intended, and so being really thoughtful about those things.
Right. And also, I have to bring up immigration when you talk about social economics.
Yes, of course.
Because currently, right now, we are seeing a lot of kids, immigrant kids, who are being bullied. Some of them outright verbally, some of them physically, and certainly more perniciously through cyber issues or relationship bullying. Yeah, and there seems, clearly the political climate is contributing to a lot of this. And we
Seems to
have
make it
patients
okay.
who are terrified, yeah.
You have a question?
So yes, my question is, in regards to the mice, have you ever done an experiment where mice that has been the victim and placed it with another person who has been a victim and see how that power play works? So a victim and a victim before?
Yes, those experiments have been done. It doesn't really help them. Two victims together in terms of mice does not seem to confer protection. It can be a tiny bit protective to be with a non-victim. So being put into the cage of a mouse who's never experienced bullying can offer some protection.
When you were just talking, Marina, about taking a child out of a bad school and putting them in a good school, that they need support, of course, made me think of Trading Places. In the movie, you take Eddie Murphy off the streets and put him in a fancy trading environment. Is that helpful to try to take them out of the environment that they've been bullied in?
So what you're asking, I think, is so if you have how many of you have had families come to you like, should I change schools for my child, right? Is it the right time or not? And again, it's all about advocacy. If you've tried to work with a school and it's not working, and the school really is not making change to support that young person, sometimes, unfortunately, it's the option, right? Because you don't want that individual child to suffer because the school has not made changes. And sometimes that's what it takes, and I'm sure you've all seen this. I had a situation where I had a young person who, I had talked with the school, I talked about what impact I thought it was having, and it felt like they were not on this family's side, and I really did recommend they went to another school, and they did, and she's much happier.
Which isn't always an option.
It's not always an option. It's not always, it shouldn't be the go-to, but again, if you can't change the structure of a place, and I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes up a lot. I think schools are very different in terms of how they respond to parents and students who are complaining of being bullied. So, and I think that definitely comes into play. I think it's a very individualized kind of assessment, like for this child or adolescent at this time, given what's going on, is transitioning to another school.
In New York City, they have what's called safety transfers. Do they have them here, up in Westchester? Right? So that's what I'm thinking of. And generally, kids who've been bullied, who've been felt like they, really cannot survive in the school are actually allowed to apply for a safety transfer to a transfer school where there seem to be more resources in place for these kind of kids. Does it always work? Not always, and often there's a lot of other elements that contribute to the problem here. But it also, you know, there are certain schools that are meant for kids, Harvey Milk School, for kids who are really having a hard time, LGBT kids who are having a hard time. It's a wonderful environment. I've seen some kids completely flourish when they're able to go to a school where they just feel more accepted.
I should also,
I was going to say for some people that narrative is important. Like my family and my physician thought it was important enough for me to make this change, right? So that can be the advocacy, that connection that we're talking about. And I don't know if that makes neurobiological changes or not, but I think that can be important for some people, depending.
John?
no, I was going to say, you know, for kids that are, you know, more disadvantaged, that don't have parents who can advocate for themselves, I think it's much, much harder. But I've seen parents get law enforcement involved. I mean, I had a kid who was being cyberbullied by a sexual predator, and, you know, they got the FBI involved. I mean, the FBI has a specific unit that addresses sexual cyberbullying. And, you know, the police also can get involved in some of these cases where there's threats being made. And sometimes parents get attorneys involved when they're having real issues with the school. And again, this is not something that kids who are disadvantaged can generally, you know, have their parents do, but it certainly is done.
So there, I mean, obviously you don't want to go to the nuclear option right away.
Right.
You want to try some of these other interventions first.
Right.
But it's good to know that there are these other options.
Right, you know, and you don't want a kid who's being continually exposed to ongoing bullying while you're trying to institute changes, and then every day the kid is going to school and being bullied more, and then stops going to school, grades drop, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't wait too long, so if you're not getting a response.
Yes. Question? Dr. Wiener. We have a shill in the audience.
I would like to thank you, Matt, and the panelists. I think that this was an incredible discussion. I certainly learned from the conversation, and I would ask people who are in the audience or if they would consider, and I'm going to volunteer you all, to come to give grand rounds at hospitals you may be affiliated with, or with PTAs that you may know, or school systems in Westchester. I think this would be an incredible discussion to have at a PTA meeting, for example, or at a school conference, or at a hospital grand round. The information that you share with us is absolutely topical, important, and should be shared by a much larger audience. You all just were great. Thank you.
Michael, how should these folks then request or get in?
So I think that there were people who replied to you, so they can get back to you, and perhaps you could be the conduit that could, you know, if someone has a suggestion, going to grand round school system, you can reach Katie, and she can help, you know, put that together.
Good.
I urge you to do it. This is so important.
Good idea. Terrific. So I have another question here for the panel. And, you know, sooner or later we were going to have to get into politics, I suppose. But there is a candidate running for president who has said the way to deal with a bully is to punch him in the nose. How is that for an approach? Does that work? Is that a good idea? You don't have to mention names. You don't have to mention names. You know, we can go generic bully.
I'm going to tell you a personal funny story. So I have big nose, actually, not a small nose. And when I was younger, in like 6th grade, the 8th grade boys would stand on a line and call my name, and I would turn, and they would all go, oh, 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 like as though I were hitting them with my nose. I know it's so mean, right? And my mom would say, I just think they're jealous. And I believed her. I was like, oh, okay, that's why. Now, she could have said, when I was younger, she would say, like, go kick him in the shins, and I did. I believed her then, too. And I saw her shift in the way that she sort of decided to build me up rather than kind of put them down, right? So you cannot tell someone to fight. Like, you have to tell people to protect themselves,
Right.
but you cannot tell them to retaliate in that way, because ultimately what ends up happening, as we all know the story, is the bullied is the one that gets in trouble. Everyone's going to say they're the one who started it, et cetera. Do I think it's important for people to protect themselves? You protect yourselves in different ways, right? There are all sorts of like classes for self-defense, or but not putting themselves in situations as much as possible, like avoiding things. So I think that a lot of that is, though, getting to the parents about what do you tell your child, right? Like, what do you say when they come and tell you this, right? It's really hard. If you have a child who's ever been bullied, you want to go do something yourself sometimes, right? And I'm sure that was my mother's feeling when she, looked at me and the small child I was with the same nose size, right? I'm sure that was the feeling she had, but instead she sort of said, like, let me build her up, because this is a better choice for her, right? So I think it's getting to, like, what are parents saying and how can you help them, again, to think about their kid and avoiding getting them into more trouble. I know maybe you guys have different ideas
And there's
about
the
it.
tragic case in the Bronx, right, where there was a child who was bullied for his, I think, sexuality, who eventually, someone threw a spitball at him, and he turned around with a knife and killed the other kid, right?
Right.
Yeah, and he's now in jail. He was convicted, and right. So we have to, and that's terrifying on all fronts. So we really have to be careful when we talk to kids who are being bullied about how to increase their self-worth, stand up for themselves, do not retaliate with violence, because that stuff just snowballs and is terrible for all.
Dani?
I very much want to echo that the retaliation aspect is really not the right way. And I'll also provide a sort of anecdote, which is that my twin daughters are 15 now, and they were in Taekwondo for 7 years. And one of the most beautiful messages that their teacher of the whole 7 years always would give them is, if somebody is in an alley and you're scared, or they're threatening you, the first thing, run. And that's really beautiful, because to me it's not that you're a coward. It's that you're just not going to engage in that behavior. And there's absolutely no reason why we should respond to a bully by bullying back. We should respond to a bully by running away.
Did any of the bullied mice fight back? Just curious.
They do. Just by the nature of the experiment, they're much smaller, and so they cannot by definition win.
Right. Yeah, John, you were going to say?
You do have to still screen for it. I don't mean to interrupt you. You do still have to screen for, do they want to retaliate? Because I think what Karen said before about weapon carrying, et cetera, is really important.
No, I was going to say a lot of this has to do with traditional male stereotypes, and what I see a lot of times is the fathers of the boys that are being bullying encourage them to hit back, and I think it becomes an issue within the family, and oftentimes a divisive issue between the mother and the father, because it's usually the father that's condoning or encouraging violence because they want their kid to stick up for himself, usually. So I think it's something that often has to be dealt with within the family system too, but I agree it's not a solution at all, and teaches exactly the wrong thing.
Question? Anybody else? All the way in the back there? I see a hand waving back there.
It's freezing.
Stop
I just
him from
suddenly got
feeding.
cold, right? I know. He's having lunch too, sorry. So I guess I'd be curious to hear you maybe more specifically address, from a medical or scientific perspective, the flight or fight phenomenon, and how that accounts in like human behavior and bullying. And then the second part of my question, getting back to the politics, I guess, is just about access to some of the resources we're talking about for countering bullying, whether it's medical or not. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we can talk. Access, I think, is important. But what was the first part again? Oh, fight or flight. That Danny,
So-
it sounds like it's up your alley.
it's a very complicated issue. So what we do know in stress biology is that the fight or flight response is not all bad. Even now we're sort of overemphasizing a little bit here the negative aspect of stress. There has also been a lot of research showing that stress is incredibly important, and that a certain amount of stress, and perhaps it's not really the amount of stress, but sort of the sequence of stress and what the stress is followed by, is actually protective and can build resilience. So, I think we are starting to really appreciate over the last decade that it's also not good to protect children completely and to remove all their fight or flight response, because that will not be able to prepare them to have an adequate adrenaline, cortisol rush, and all of the good stuff that actually happens when you're put in that situation. So if you've never encountered the lion in your life, the first time you do so, if you're an adult, you're probably going to be eaten by the lion, right? As opposed to if if you've seen a lion, if you've seen your neighbor be taken by a lion when you were a little kid, that will kind of prompt you to learn how to react in that case, and you'll be able to run. So it's a complicated issue because we also do not yet know in basic neuroscience what the right amount is, what that sequence might be, and that's one of the things that I'm very interested in my own lab.
Let's talk access to resources here that might
I can give
be
you
beneficial.
something.
Please.
So the American Academy of Pediatrics has this very nice project called the Resilience Project. It's on their website if you want to look at it. And it gives you a whole bunch of handouts for kids, handouts for parents, a really good piece on cyberbullying for parents with some resources at the end. And just how should a parent approach it? How should a parent prevent cyberbullying? What do you do if your child is being bullied? So I would definitely recommend that.
What's the role of the school system? When do you get them involved? Please.
I think whenever a kid is being bullied in the school has to be involved. Karen shared the statistics on kids being bullied, the Youth First Behavior Survey, and kids getting bullied at schools, whatever it was, 19% of kids bullied on school grounds. So I think the school has to be involved in kids who are, with kids who are being bullied on school grounds. And I think it's their responsibility, and I think it's unfortunately parents' job to make them responsible for, what's going on their campuses. And just to quickly touch on the politics, and I don't want to touch on the politics too much, and also on access. And what I thought you were asking was access to weapons, because access to weapons is another issue, talking about the politics of all, because a lot of kids who are bullied often fight back with weapons, right, with guns. It's obviously guns is a major issue. Right. But the politics have to do with tolerance, divisiveness, and respect for difference, right? So the more that we have a culture that promotes intolerance and divisiveness and lack of respect, the more you're going to have bullying, and so that's obviously a hot political issue that Karen also alluded to that I think is much worse now.
Absolutely. Let me ask our audience here. Do you have your microphone yet? Let's bring a microphone up front. But let me ask our folks here, has it been your experience that the school system is responsive to allegations of bullying? Because sometimes we hear that the school system kind of, brushes it off until it gets to be a real crisis. Yes, our executive from Westchester County, actually.
Commissioner of Westchester County Mental Health, and I also represent the county executive's office. In Westchester, we have 42 school districts, so there's a lot of school districts all at different levels. And we do have to report through a VADER system when there are incidents of bullying. But what we promote a lot in Westchester is school-wide positive behavior prevention support. It's a model that really incorporates best practices, including resiliency, trauma-informed care. So the schools that are further ahead are really incorporating these mindfulness, these proactive strategies, use of DBT within the general school audience. So the answer to the question is yes, we have many schools that are engaged and others that could be moving along. But if anyone is interested in any of these committees, we do have a suicide prevention coalition, our district attorney, county executive
I saw a couple of hands in the back there that wanted to comment on that. Yes, please.
Well, I'm a school social worker in Yonkers.
Mm-hmm.
We got 42 schools, so we do have that safety net when there's an issue. I'm in the high school. When there's an issue, it'll go to one of the other high schools. There's 8 high schools. The problem is it's that cyber bullying. So we removed that from the problem in one school, but it's carried over to a media.
Because that easily follows them to wherever they go.
They put it on Instagram and it disappears after 24 hours. So it's a big issue.
John, you were going to say something?
You know, you just made me think of something else, but there are other resources, like there's stopbullying.gov. The CDC has resources on its website. I think I forwarded their pamphlet on bullying and suicide to Katie. So there are a lot of other resources. The Child Academy website has resources also. But I think you raised a really good point with cyberbullying, about it traveling to other places and it being done in a very clandestine way. Just yesterday I was involved with a girl who was sexted something by a boy and something profane, and then she was kind of attacked by his friend when she accused him. It got into this whole thing and, you know, led to a whole host of problems. So then they went to the principal. The principal encouraged the two parents, the parents of the girl and the parents of the boy, to kind of somehow resolve this. Of course, the boy denied that he'd sent the picture, but of course it was sent over Snapchat, so the thing dissolved, and, you know, however fast that kind of thing dissolves. And they got into this whole, the families got into this whole disagreement, and the principal, it wasn't in Westchester County, but the principal kind of stepped out of the whole thing. And it turned into just a huge mess. And it's continuing now. She's not even in that school anymore, as you pointed out, because now the boys' friends are now continuing to attack. So it's a real problem. And sometimes you need to shut down the social media completely, change accounts, you know, and start fresh in a new school.
You need that mediator. The principal really should have been a mediator in that, in one way or another.
There are school systems, and I'm curious about Westchester, but there are school systems that have contracts that the kids sign. Again, like thinking about, like, it's not just the parents, but the kids take ownership, that the kids will sign contracts saying if they see cyberbullying or they're part of it, that they're going to basically ask one another to stop and actually report it as well. And again, you try to avoid these punitive measures, but it's more of a sort of like, we're going to keep each other safe situation. And one of the things also, for, you know, depending on, you know, for a kid who has no hope, and talk about trauma-informed care, they may not care about this as much, but our medical school is starting to, like, when people apply now, they look at, like, what's on social media. So that's, I mean, right. I started telling people this, like, who are applying to college, like, you know, I think that people are looking now at what you have out there. And, you know, if Snapchat goes away, nothing really goes away, right? Not to scare people, but there's responsibility. And so I do think there has been some success. I haven't read any studies, but some success about, and I don't know if your school system does this, but having kids really sign contracts and say, like, we're not going to engage, and if we see it, we're going to do something about it. Again, these things never work 100%, but at least there's the intention and the prevention piece.
I have a question up here. Is that Vera? Is that right?
Venus.
Venus, okay.
So I have a question. It relates back to school. So would you say that there are certain environments that foster a higher likelihood of bullying? So Karen, your example of the child in the Bronx who ended up stabbing his bullier. I grew up in the city. I bounced around through 10 different schools before I ended up graduating from high school. So I've seen it all, and I've noticed that in the lower socioeconomic schools, you know, the teachers, some of them can't control their classrooms, and when they can't control their classrooms, the kids end up just doing whatever they want, and throwing a spitball at their student is something that will happen continuously because the teacher isn't, you know, they don't have any control over the classroom. So, but on that same note, I've never been to a higher affluent type of public school. So my question is, would you say that there are some schools, some environments, some socioeconomic classes that foster this higher likelihood of bullying? And it's for everyone, it's not just Karen.
No, it's an interesting thought. I think bullying is pervasive, and because it's all about power. And power struggles are everywhere in all socioeconomic classes, among girls in a different way perhaps than among boys, but it's there. I think In certain schools where the kids really are not controlled by teachers who are probably not very experienced, you're right, you're going to get a lot more physical violence, right? And so, but in other schools you may get less physical violence, but you may get more cyberbullying, whatever. It's out there all the time for all schools. I think the way it manifests might be different in certain schools, depending on what kind of oversight there is. If that
My
makes
concern
sense.
is like the intersectionality of, of vulnerability, and that for a kid who is being bullied and is a lower socioeconomic school, they're probably not going to have a lot of other support. So being able to access mental health care, or so in many ways, like there are places where the scaffolding should be there, and it often isn't. And it's not that they're more likely to bully; it's just that I think the effects of it will be more. More grave in some ways. That's the way I think about it.
I should also say that I think even in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods and schools, there can be a different school culture. One of my daughters is a special ed teacher in Bushwick in a very charter school, which serves a very socioeconomically disadvantaged population of kids. And the principal, and I've gone to the school actually because she invites me to go there on career day every year, which is quite an experience, comes out on the steps every day and greets every kid that goes into that school. And it is the most amazing environment in this school. And the culture in that school is just incredibly one of connectedness and tolerance. And this woman who's a principal, she would not tolerate in 1 second anyone being mean to anybody else. And it's just part of the culture of the school, the teachers. But it's just really striking how you could do that with really poor kids in a poor neighborhood where the parents don't come to the school meetings half the time. But it's really the principal that is setting the tone in the school.
Right. But it's tough to change culture once it's
Right.
ingrained that way.
Yeah.
You have to kind of instill it from the beginning. I have a question up front up here.
So it's not so much a question, but more a statement, because I feel that we're talking more about high school and adolescence, and so I'm sitting here thinking that it's more than an age group, that it really starts from really young children and what we're talking about, because, and it was, someone said we have to teach our children to be kind, and it starts from really young age, from 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. That's where it really starts from. And so I'm not a pediatrician from this area, for example, in Rockland County. So today, in the smaller age groups, in the lower age groups, today is we're Orange to School Day, and it's Anti-Bullying Day. And so it's Bullying Awareness Day. So everyone wears orange, not because it's Halloween coming, it's just to make sure that everyone is nice to each other and to make sure that it's Anti-Bullying Day, which was kind of neat. And so I said, this is great. And I was like, oh my God, you must know about the bullying conference I'm going to. And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I was like, so, which is great. And there, it was a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. So this is what I'm talking about. This is where it really should start. And we as pediatricians and as healthcare providers and people who are working with kids, this is where we really need to start talking about to our families and talking to our kids. And all it is talking to our families, telling them that they need to be kind to one another. And that's where we need to do, is sort of promoting it there and not waiting to high school.
Right. And instilling that culture early on.
Exactly, instilling that culture.
I couldn't agree more, except for with one point, that it doesn't start till 4 or 5.
No.
Rather at birth.
Right, well, yes, exactly.
One of the things, one of the reasons I went into pediatrics is because of the ability of us as pediatricians to have a really key role at these inflection points. And one of my hopes is that the same way that we kind of, we know that we routinely have to check blood pressure starting at the age of 3, right? That we start making these very small contributions at every single visit. So I'm a pediatrician in the Well Baby Nursery, and one of the things that I talk to all of my patients about is brain development and emotional connection, which, there are these little small ways of starting exactly the conversation that you're mentioning, but even earlier, right? If we start emotionally connecting from birth, because if you think about it, birth is actually this disruptive connection point, right? And so there's this inflection already there that if you can connect babies to not just their mothers, but also everybody else in their family, other babies, that connectivity kind of will propagate into the rest of their lives.
That's why we have the parents or volunteers coming in and just holding babies in the NICU, just so they have that human connection.
Absolutely.
I also think there's something about that we should be pushing more for bystander intervention. We're doing that now with sexual assault prevention. And I think it's really interesting. But if you'd even do it with little kids, starting with little kids, telling them if you see someone being hurt, figure out how to stick up for that person. Tell someone, don't hurt that person, whatever it is going to be, and then be kind to the person being hurt. If we start that young, but also do that with teenagers, I think that's really critical. It also empowers someone. If you're giving them the power to stop something bad, they're feeling better about themselves, and they themselves then are less likely, perhaps, to be victims of bullying. So I think we really want to push on that too. We're doing that with suicidality. We're telling our kids to watch for their friends in case there's a problem with suicide. But we should be doing that with respect to bullying.
Question? We have a microphone on. There you go.
I wouldn't say it was much of a question, but kind of to the idea that you brought up with the school signing, almost giving them accountability on the cyberbullying. Wouldn't you say that it would be best to start early to kind of learn, young kids and even as early adolescents to learn how to understand that certain actions lead to consequences? Because I feel like a lot of times they don't really know the consequences, they just act on impulse. So wouldn't you guys think it would be like or I don't know if you guys can input on that. Is there some type of way we can teach young kids along with adolescents the different consequences on each actions they make, whether it's to prevent bullying, whether it's if they are the bully or what consequences could come afterward, or all that?
It's interesting, but if you look at the developmental stages of adolescence, you go from very concrete to abstract thought, cognitively, and the ability to see future consequences is not quite there for younger kids or even for early adolescents necessarily. They can see maybe the next step, but they're not going to see the several steps down the line. So yes, it would be good, and certainly next step consequences can be discussed for littler kids, but it's just something you have to be cognizant of, that developmentally they can only do so much.
I have a question here because many of you have described some of the warning signs for kids who are being bullied. Acting out, withdrawing, sleep disturbances, a number of different things, which have a significant overlap with clinical depression. And that's also obviously a big issue. How do you distinguish between a kid who's being bullied, obviously I think there's going to be some overlap, and something like true clinical depression, which is, they may not be getting bullied, they're just depressed?
Well, I mean, there's a bi-directional relationship there. Kids who are depressed are more likely to get bullied, and kids that are bullied are more likely to get depressed. So I think that anytime you're assessing or working with a depressed kid, hearing about their interpersonal relationships, particularly with adolescents, I mean, interpersonal relationships is a major driver for depression, right? So that has to be a focus of treatment regardless of how you conceptualize treatment. And, obviously we use medicines for depression, but never without psychotherapy and never without thinking about the environment of the child or adolescent if we are going to use medicine. So I think you're splitting hairs to say, well, this much of it is from the bullying and this much of it isn't. You have to deal with the whole problem regardless. But knowing about it is really important. And I think particularly with teenagers, the interpersonal relationships and dealing with that piece of it is really super, super important.
That adds another layer here for schools and some of the other folks trying to tease these things out, no?
Yeah.
And that makes it all that much more difficult?
It does make it difficult, and a lot of times kids don't confide in school personnel what's going on in school, and that's a mixed blessing too, because a lot of times schools react with a kind of risk prevention piece of it. So a child is distressed, and then they don't want the child in the school anymore, or they send the child to our ER, to be assessed or something, because they don't, feel that they can handle it. So I think there's a very complicated relationship between students and the school, and that's, I think, where the parents really, hopefully, can step in cases where they're available.
We have any other questions? If not, I have, what I like to do in our panels here is ask each of our panelists to give us a little 30, 60 second maybe, pearl of wisdom nugget for everyone to take home. What's the take home lesson you want to make sure that our folks remember when they go home? And Dani, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start with you.
So obviously, 80% of my time I work on something that seems relatively abstract in terms of the day-to-day activities of a pediatrician. But I do think it's important that we focus on this at all levels. So not just at the level of intervention in terms of, for example, adolescence, but really starting at the foundation of prevention and building that up from the basic science all the way through the intervention. And that's what I hope we're going to see more and more over the next couple of decades, because medicine traditionally has really focused on this kind of patchwork of, when something goes wrong, then you try to fix it. And I think that the revolution in medicine moving forward is going to be to really start from the ground up and prevent some of these issues.
Good. Karen?
You're really putting us on the spot because you did not warn us about this, but I'm going to pull it together here. Okay.
All
All right.
enough to handle.
So I would say, both as parents and as healthcare providers, I would say one of my key points is be nosy, ask the questions, ask the kids, ask the parents, don't be afraid. And some of my residents look at me and go, you really asked that? And I say, yep, I asked that. Because if you don't ask, you'll never know. That's number one. But the caveat to that is, as my own personal kids now tell me, don't be judgy. You have to ask the questions, but you can't be a judger. You can't judge the answers. So, but until we ask the questions, we really will not know what's happening to these kids.
You did great. What are you worried about?
I'll give 3 pearls. So
Okay.
the first is if you're a provider, that spend time with kids alone once they are really able to interact with you, and that it's not just about asking them what's going wrong, but it's also giving them the capacity to talk to an adult and the belief that they can do so. The second is that the prevention piece, I think, is huge, and thinking about this as part of your anticipatory guidance with regard to when you talked about stress. When I think about, I usually have a slide, no slides here, it's stress, and then it's like coping mechanism, internalization, which ends up to something bad, or coping mechanisms that can be negative for you. So what are you talking about with families about coping with stress? Everybody has stress on a daily basis. It does motivate people. That's really important. But think about that in a preventive fashion with families. And then the third is, we had a speaker last week who said exactly what Karen said before, which is kindness, and making that part of your environment, whether it's the school environment, the office environment, we take care of teenagers in what I call the back alley of our clinic, and everybody's really nice to them. If they come in goth wear, or if they come in with blue hair, or whatever it is, right? Yep. Everyone knows them, they know their name, they're celebrated when they're there, and I think that that kindness can really make a big difference.
Good news is you've got time to think about it. I know. Bad news is I probably said everything.
It's like being the cleanup hitter or something. Yeah. I guess what I was thinking of was, to think big and think small. Like, everyone wants a quick fix to something. Someone's a bully, get rid of the bully. But the bully's part of a larger problem who has problems of his own, and your child who's getting bullied exists within a family, within a social environment, and within a culture that, is part of this set of risk factors that leads to this adverse condition that we call bullying, that's associated with a lot of other adverse conditions. So I think to resist the idea to think you're going to fix something by getting rid of the bully, taking the kid out of the school, but we need to look at ourselves and what we're doing to both contribute to and solve this problem, not just within our families, but within our communities and within our culture. So,
well, terrific. I want to thank our panelists for multiple pearls of wisdom here. And I think what the other take-home lesson is, there are resources. There are things out there that can help you. And you just have to look for them and then offer them to parents and kids who are having these problems. thank our panelists, and I think Dr. Weiner has volunteered them to come to your school or PTA meeting. But thank you very much for attending, and we hope that this made a difference for you. Thank you.